Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning on Learning Collective. I'm Ann Wynn, Marketing Specialist with Risk Inc. I hope everyone had an enjoyable holiday weekend. I'm still lost. I keep thinking it's Tuesday or Monday, and it's actually Wednesday. And welcome this morning to Debbie Richards, who is going to be sharing with us her knowledge and expertise on immersive learning. So immersive learning is no longer just a buzzword. It is now a reality, pun intended, in many training programs and learning programs. And she's going to share the things that you need to consider when you are thinking about using immersive learning and share some use cases as well. Good morning, Duncan. So he's joining us.
Good morning, Ann. Good morning, Duncan.
Thank you for joining us today. And I know that you are someone who probably does not need an introduction in this industry, but I do have some info that I would like to share with the viewers who may not be familiar with you, which is probably very rare. So again, if you're not familiar with Debbie Richards, she is the current president of, she's the president of Creative Interactive Ideas and the current president of ATD Houston chapter. She's pretty much ATD Houston. I think the chapter would fall apart if you were not part of it, Debbie. My own opinion, and I'm sure many others share it as well. So Debbie was named one of the most influential people in corporate e-learning for 2016 and is named as one of the e-learning movers and shakers for 2017. She serves as a consultant to corporations and organizations and supports clients in the area of instructional technology. She also works with organizations to design, develop, and deliver technology-based adult learning programs with measurable impact. She's very passionate about working with and mentoring other learning professionals, which is why we love you so much. And Debbie has served as past president of the ATD Houston chapter and is a national advisor for the ATD chapters as well. So welcome again this morning.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. So you are in your office, I know, and there is, for those who've not been to Debbie's office, there is a massive Pez collection.
On the other side of the room.
Which we won't turn the camera around. So again, thanks for joining us. And I'm super excited to hear what you have to say. I was looking through some of the information you shared with me, and I can't wait to hear some, more of the use cases. And I know immersive learning is, really getting to the forefront for learning programs, and people are understanding how effective it can be. And so I'm glad to have you on to share this. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up your presentation if you're ready to go, and I will let you take it away.
Thank you so much, Ann. I'm really happy to be here with you this morning and to discuss immersive learning. Now, this particular deck that I'm going to be sharing, and Ann has it, so you guys can take a look at it later, and there are also some links that you can access. It primarily focuses on virtual reality, but I think the topics that I'm talking about can be the same and discussed for augmented reality as well. And there are a number of things that I discuss on both topics. So let's just dive right in. First of all, when you're looking at companies that are currently using virtual reality for training and simulations, people think that number is not a large number, but in fact, there are already a large number of companies that are using it. In 2019, with this one poll, we can see that 24% of companies are using VR for training and simulation. And then the worldwide spending on augmented and virtual reality is expected to reach over $18 billion this year, according to the IDC. And as well, there is the eventuality that AR and VR are going to become mainstream in your organization. This is a quote from a study that Capgemini did in 2018, but I still think it holds true when you look at where people are looking at bringing in AR and VR into their organization. There are a number of people that we'll be doing that in the next 1 to 3 years, and then on to the next 5 years. So they're making that at stride. I think where a lot of people are they're doing proof of concepts, they're doing pilot studies, they're trying to gain an understanding of how to bring these immersive learning platforms into their organization. And because of that, there are a number of things that they're going to have to do and they're going to have to think about. And that's the focus of my presentation this morning. So here are the top 5 things that I think that you're going to have to look at when you're thinking about immersive learning, and we'll dive into each one of these and talk about those in detail. The first one is exploiting uniqueness, and I think you need to identify and understand why immersive learning, and in this case VR, is unique, and what does it offer that is different than the other types of training that you're doing. So, like a lot of online learning, this type of learning brings consistency because learners can they can do the applications over and over again. The experience is the same from one person to the next because it's something that's set up. It's something that they can actively participate in, and from a retention standpoint, they can go in and repeat the activities over and over again. And so those are things that allow them to really dive in and have that experiential learning. There is also a certain sense of being present in the moment, and being focused on the task at hand, and as well as with the certain virtual reality experiences and augmented reality experiences, there really is a focus on empathy as well. So that's one thing, and I think if you are thinking about bringing immersive learning into your environment, if you haven't already experienced it, you need to experience it. Either augmented or virtual reality. There are a number of platforms already out there that you can use to do this, and you don't have to invest in a lot of expensive technology. You can get a Google Cardboard and experience some of the videos that are out on YouTube just to understand what virtual reality looks like, or augmented reality. There are a number of applications that are out there that you can look at. But then you need to start thinking about, how am I going to bring this into my enterprise organization through a proof of concept or a pilot, and understanding what value it's going to have within the organization. So that takes us to our next topic, is the right use cases. So thinking in terms of finding that right use case, you don't want to start off with a technology and say, hey, I am interested in doing something with augmented reality and virtual reality. So I'm going to pick one of those technologies, and then I'm going to figure out how I'm going to involve that within my organization. Just like any other learning platform that you use, it's got to be the right reason. So don't just do it just because you think it's cool or you think it's interesting and it's something that the organization might be interested in as well. You need to figure out what the problem is that you're trying to solve. And here are some examples of some things that you might look at. So the first thing is, if you're thinking about improving employee engagement. So the idea here is to give people the opportunity to repeat a task, and they can perform that task in different ways based on the scenario that you present to them. You can give them some really good feedback. You can record the time spent and that level of interactivity that they have. You can also look at how long it takes for them to complete the tasks and whether or not they are doing it correctly. There's so much data that you can get out of immersive learning that you can really build a use case that will span over past learning and development into other areas. So if you're trying to find the right use case, you can work with your risk assessment department or continuous improvement, safety, other areas to look at what can we do to improve performance and improve competency in tasks. And doing these tasks in immersive learning will really give you a sense of the data that you wouldn't be able to get with a live performance, because the technology will capture everything that the user does, from clicking on something, from even looking a certain way, how long they looked that way, how long it took them to accomplish the steps, can capture all that data. And you can also have a lot of learners and a higher volume of learners that go through the training as things pick up, and as you work through the scenarios. You can have multiple people in the same scenario, because in real life, many times to perform a task, it may take more than one person. And in immersive learning, building the scenario correctly, you could have multiple people involved in that. And then there are a number of other things, improving on existing practices, thinking about how can you improve, and look at errors that are being made. Are people just inherently looking one direction when they should be looking someplace else? Or are they, when you just let them perform the tasks, are they doing them in a different order because it just makes sense to them? And how many people are doing that? And then thinking about the standardization of what you're doing, and how you do it, making sure that it's consistent, and the way that you're doing it. And then finally, of course, especially in today's world, reducing the cost of having live delivery and having to have people physically be in a location. With immersive learning, they can be anywhere in the world, in a virtual environment, and have the training. So these are just some of the things that you can look at when you're trying to think about that problem. And then here are some areas that you can look at for applications. And when you're thinking about trying to find that right use case, or finding that evangelist that's going to help you and spearhead your application, think about some of the different ways that people could use immersive learning. Most people think first about health and safety, but you can also use this for soft skills training, and also for simulations. And then there are people that are using immersive learning for key procedures, having a good list of things that people should be doing, and having them follow that either in augmented or virtual reality. It's an excellent tool for onboarding as well, because again, you can give them that environment of being in the live facility without actually having to physically be there. And finally, as a way of assessment. So there are a number of different things that you could use, and that would apply to immersive learning. But when you're thinking about these things, one thing I will caution you is that think in terms of these applications not being a replacement for existing training, but as something that you will augment. So I always think of this type of learning as part of a blended learning approach. So you may start off with something where you give the learner some basic information, and then you allow them to go into immersive learning to practice and to refine the tasks before you assess them, maybe in a real life situation or with a proctored exam or something else. But I don't think that you should consider it as a replacement for an existing program. It should be something that you add on as well. So again, here's some examples of different places that you can have virtual reality training, and you'll see in this instance, the first instance on the left in the health and safety, there's actually two people here, and there's this one person who is performing the tasks, and there's someone else in virtual reality who's a mentor who's helping this person through. And that should be typical of an experience. You may have somebody who is performing a task by themselves, and maybe that mentor is outside of the VR experience and the person can hear them, but oftentimes we may have that person inside of the experience as well as outside. The second example here is a soft skills example with a sales negotiation. So here is the person in VR, and they're talking to an avatar who has artificial intelligence built in to respond to the things that the person says. And then here on the bottom left, we have some people who are in training, and you have the trainer there with them showing them how to operate the equipment. And then finally, here is an employee going through some employee onboarding by themselves. So with immersive learning, it's not a single person experience. And you should think about, how can I make this, more engaging and interesting by involving other people, if that makes sense. And really thinking about, how am I going to fine tune this experience so the learner gets the most out of it, and that it is a true simulation or example of what they might be looking at. All right. So now let's talk about hearts or minds. And this is our third data point. So in this process, you have your first your proof of concept. And this proof of concept is, I call a heart process. So you're thinking about, how can I work with my enterprise organization and have them understand just what immersive learning is. And so you want to start off with a proof of concept. Now, that proof of concept may be something that you don't develop yourself. It may be something that you show the people in your organization, something that's already created, and have them experience that. And there are a number of agencies that will help you do that. They'll take you into projects that they've already built, and they will show you how it works and give you a nice idea and a sense of that experience. And that could be either the augmented reality or virtual reality sense. You may decide to create your own proof of concept. There are some tools that you can use that are low stakes tools to just get people into a virtual reality experience. Adobe Captivate has a tool that you can use where you can bring in a 360 image and then have some interactivity, just so you can show people what a virtual reality experience is like. So one or the other, bringing in an agency that has some things that are already completed, but may not be something that could apply to your unique situation or use case, or building something simple yourself. I wouldn't invest a whole lot in a proof of concept, because that's just the way that you get people excited and get them interested. Then the next piece is a pilot. So when you're thinking about doing a pilot, there are several things that you need to keep in mind. You want to make sure that it applies to your use case, and that you are thinking about, how can I scale down what I need so that I can accomplish the goals that I'm setting out to. So that may be something that's data driven. So you may think, I want to take a portion of a task and run a number of people through that, so I can show the data to my process improvement team or risk assessment team. And again, you don't want to spend a whole lot of money on that, but you want to be able to have something that's going to really take it from beginning to end, to show that entire process. And again, you can do this yourself, or you could bring in an agency. And I would expect to pay anywhere from $30,000 to $100,000, depending on what you're trying to do, to really do a good pilot. And that would be bringing in an agency, or bringing in some internal consultants and resources to do this. You probably are not going to have people on staff to get you through a pilot, and to ramp up and get through that pilot. it would probably make more sense to bring in people who already have experience with the tools and the technologies, and you just concentrate on the content and make sure that you are accomplishing your business case, and getting the information resolved. And then finally thinking about how are you going to go from pilot to production rollout to, if you're going to start with maybe 30, 45 people running through a pilot, and then you want to roll it out to 100 or 1,500 people in your organization. What's that going to look like? So when I think about that pilot, I think about 4 buckets of things that I'm going to have to do. And I take that information and move that into my production. So first of all, um, hardware. What kind of hardware are you going to use? And depending on the task that you're trying to accomplish, there may be some basic hardware that you can use, or you may need some really advanced hardware. When I'm talking about hardware, I'm talking about for VR, the headsets, the computer equipment, anything else that's involved in setting up the experience for the user. Of course, you've got to think about the content. What exactly are you trying to accomplish? What's the business case, and what's going to make the best sense for my organization, so that I can show a good return on investment, and I can prove why we need to use immersive learning for what we're doing. How are you going to distribute this? So, for the pilot, you may use a couple of remote sites and have people run through the experience. But then, if you need to go from 2 remote sites to 30 remote sites, what is your implementation plan, and how does that work, and who are you going to involve? You may need to involve people at the local level. You may need to involve IT. There are a number of other folks that you'll have to involve in order to push out that technology. And then finally, what's the data that you want to capture? What information is critical for the success of your pilot? And then thinking in terms of that production rollout, what information do you need to capture? Because there's so much information you can capture from this. So that's a pilot. Now, here's just a quick checklist of thinking in terms of going from your proof of concept through your production. Always keep these things in mind. And when you look at this list, and I look at it, I think of anything that I've tried to develop for learning delivery. We always think about the problem we're trying to solve, our audience. How are we doing this currently? What are some of the things we want to measure? Do we want to have this done remotely or on site? Are we going to develop it in-house, or are we going to use an agency? How are we going to implement this? What's our technology choice? And then how are we going to determine success? So we need to make sure that we have all those things in mind when we're working through the whole process. I'm going to take just a second and clear my throat. Okay. Any comments or questions on what I've covered so far? I've kind of gone through a lot of information. I just thought I would take a brief moment and see if anybody has questions, or if you have some questions afterwards, if you want to shoot them to me, we'll have my information, and you can use that as well. All right, I'll trudge on then. Okay, there's a question. What have you found to be some reasons for pushback to planning a program? I think some of the reasons that I've seen people struggle with planning a program is not having enough information up front and being realistic about the information. So immersive learning today still is not an inexpensive process. If you really want to do it right, and you are looking at investing in the technology and thinking long term, it's a capital expense. So you need to make sure that you find the right business partner within your organization and make sure they understand what you're doing and what the benefits are and what you're trying to accomplish. Don't surprise them with that because that would definitely be a pushback. You need to involve people early. You need to involve the right people, whether it's legal or IT or business units, whoever you need to involve. I'm working on a project now, and the person who is the evangelist for the program is someone who has made a significant investment in both time and effort in immersive technology, not only from the learning standpoint, but from the manufacturing standpoint. So they are bringing in technologies to improve things in the manufacturing process. They're looking at artificial intelligence, they're looking at robotics and other things. So they have already made an investment in technology. The idea here is for us to make sure that they understand how immersive learning can fit into the overall profile of what they're doing and how it adds value to what they're doing. So Duncan has an excellent question about what stakeholders should be involved. You really need to take this outside of L&D. Definitely, you need to have IT involved. You need to have maybe your HR technology group involved in the process. From I would say from a enterprise organization, having other business units involved, the people who would have it would have a direct, significant impact um, with whatever they're doing. If they are in the process of promoting innovation within their organization, those are going to be the right kind of people to have involved in what you're doing to give you some really good feedback, to give you the information that you need. So, excellent questions. This is my added process that I developed along with Hugh Seaton in a way to enhance the ADDIE process for developing immersive learning. There are some different steps that may be similar to what you do with learning now, but we've added in a couple of steps. The first of all, the step of determining, understanding what tools and technologies that we need to use for the job. What is this immersive learning experience a good fit for VR or AR? And then or a combination of both, understanding what you need to do and how that's going to work. Then there's the experience stage, which is an additional added step, and that is going in and doing some iterative development around that experience. You may start off with a small scale component where you are just doing a prototype and just testing that and making sure that certain things are going to work correctly, and then building onto that till you have your final piece that you're working with. So these are some things that I think that you need to consider as you start to determine what you want to do with immersive learning and you begin to develop it. And I've talked about these in the past, and I have a lot of really good information that I can share with you if you would like as well. Let's go ahead and go on. So now let's go, we're moving right along to number 4, which is integration, not duplication. So I have been working with a company, Immersive Learning, and I really like their platform that they're using for developing virtual learning for the enterprise. And the thing that I like about this is um, the, the the approach that we're taking is you can bring in your content. If you already have VR content, you can bring it in. Their SDK sits on a Unity platform. Bring it in, build your content library. There are a number of enterprise organizations who are actually collaborating on content. building and sharing models, because there's some models and some things that people utilize that are basic. For example, here in Houston, we have a lot of organizations that are in the energy, oil, and gas industry. And there are some components and some scenarios that may be very similar from one company to another company. So if they have those components and they want to share those resources, we can have a content library, and they can share those resources among the different companies, and that collaborative environment is very successful. Then there's also the idea of how are you going to bring learners into that experience so that you can manage them. Maybe not so much for your proof of concept or your pilot, but once you start bringing it to scale and you really need to manage a large group of learners, bringing those learners in from the LMS. So the LMS may already have single sign-on and or user authentication in place so that they can identify who those users are. And the LMS handles that user management that then takes people into that experience. And in that, while they're going through that experience, you're capturing all of the data, which then gets fed back out through XAPI back out to the LMS or to a learning record store or Power BI or wherever you're going to put it in order to analyze it. So I think this is the area where a lot of companies are struggling right now, because they're trying to figure out how are we going to go from pilot to scale, and using an enterprise platform like this where you have the content and you have the learner management already taken care of will really make a difference in both the experience, engagement, and then with the output back out to whatever platform you're going to take it to. So from the standpoint of just that capturing that learner information, again, this is the place where companies, I don't think a lot of companies have thought through this experience. And this is what I really like about the Immerse platform, is that they are thinking in terms of how can we work closely together with the learning management system, and since they've already taken care of this challenge, and have them pull the information into the platform and the experience, and then take that data right back out. And that's a key component of that integration. So here's how that would work. So you would start up with people uploading the content. They're going to create the course in the platform or wherever they're going to put it. And then the learning management system would handle the course management and the scheduling of this experience. The user would launch the content. They may even launch it right out of the learning management system. The only difference between what you would think of a traditional course versus something that's an immersive learning, once that user launches the content, they may put on a headset to as their tool to interact with the content rather than using their mouse, whatever else they would normally use. And then once they launch that content, then with that learning platform, that there would be the authentication again, and then they would go through and they would complete the training in the virtual reality experience. While they're doing that, the simulation is generating and pulling together all that data, and then that data gets sent back to the LMS. So when you're thinking about how am I going to integrate this with my enterprise system, this would be something that you really want to make sure that's happening, and that you find a partner or an agency who already has something like this developed. Don't go to an agency who says, yes, we develop VR, And if you want something like that, we'll build it for you. And here's what it's going to take for us to custom build this for you. There's companies out there like Immersive who have already done this for you, and already have these platforms set up that you can utilize. Don't reinvent the wheel. Now, when you're thinking in terms of how does that work using the actual VR headset, this is an example of the Oculus Quest and how the Quest works. So when you put the headset on, you'd open up the application, and with the Immerse applications, you have to enter a PIN number, and then that PIN number is the way that they authenticate the user, and they also go out and get that content and launch it. And then while you're experiencing the information, the scenario in the Quest, it's generating the information, it's saving it and sending it back out to the LMS. And those of you who've never worked with an Oculus Quest, this little guy here on the bottom right hand side, the cool thing about the Quest is there's no wires. I have several generations of virtual reality headsets here in my office, and one of them is this big honking headset with these wires, and you can only go so far away from the computer, and you're tethered, But with Oculus Quest, you still create a boundary when you're working in VR, but you're not tethered by wires, and the information is either contained within the headset, or you're connected via Wi-Fi to the application as well. But you can download the application to your headset. And it's also much more cost effective when you're thinking about the costs that you're having to spend on equipment. A typical Oculus Quest headset is $400 to $500. There's going to be a larger price for the tool is going to be integrated for the enterprise, but that I think that piece of equipment hasn't come out yet. But a significant decrease in the cost of previous versions of virtual reality equipment, which were anywhere from $2,000 to $8,000 and required that you tether to a fairly robust laptop or desktop computer in order to launch and to work through the VR simulations. So the other thing on delivery is in thinking in terms of that immersive learning experience. You could have people that are having that same experience, and they could be in multiple locations. So in this case, we have someone who has the headset on in San Francisco and another person in London, and they are in the same virtual reality experience. And then we have some people who are observing the experience via the browser on their desktops, and they're located in other areas. So I think thinking in terms of deployment, you need to make sure that whatever experience you're going to have is going to have multi-functions. So this is a really good example of what you could do. And these people that are involved now, they can be in these different locations, so the trainer doesn't have to be physically on site with the people who are going through the training. All right, so before we dive into data, I'm just going to do a quick check and see if there are any questions from our audience, anything that I can check in. And if not, then I'll just plow right into the final point, which is data. And I think this is one of the big reasons for using immersive learning. So the immersive learning can capture just a lot of data points. And I think that one of the things that you have to determine is what is the information I want to capture? In typical learning, we've talked about how we've gone from just recording scores and completion status to XAPI, where we can capture so much more information. And immersive learning just kind of blows that out of the water, because you can have so much information that you're capturing. And then that information can be played back. So you can have it for reporting and integrating it with other information, the XAPI data, but you can also have the simulation set up so that you can replay it, so that someone could go into the VR experience after the learner has completed the steps and be in that experience and watch what the learner did in the VR headset. Now they can watch it in the browser too, but it's one way for you to really get an idea and a sense of what that learner is doing, and allow you to tweak it or to make changes based on a large amount of information, and provide good feedback. So here's two examples. So the objective evaluation is you could just capture the information as someone is going through it, and you can export that session data and look at the user behavior and their performance and take that into something else, that data, that step-by-step data of what they did. But then you could also play back that information, and this is a little more subjective, where you can watch that in real time via browser or a session recorder, and the person who's watching it in real time could make edits and comments that when the person is playing it back, they can look at that and say, okay, here's where they missed this step and what they did wrong. So I like the fact that with the Immersive platform that you have both these types of evaluations. Now here's this example of this subjective reporting tool where you can actually go in and you can say, okay, yes, this person did do this correctly. They're paying attention. They didn't do this correctly. And that can be recorded along the timeline of what they're doing, so that when you're going back and looking at it, you can make some assessments and evaluations based on what's going on. And then making sure that whatever you use needs to comply with the XAPI protocol, so that you can take that information and feed that into a learning management system or a record store or whatever else you're going to use. If the company that you're thinking about working with doesn't have this capability, you're missing half of what you need to be doing with immersive learning, because being able to get that data and to get the right kind of data is going to make a big difference. And this is what you need in order to validate the whole process and what you're wanting to accomplish, and for that capital expense that you're budgeting for as well. Okay, so let's look at a couple of case studies, and these are case studies again from Immerse that I think are really good, and the videos for these are out on YouTube, so you can go back and look at them as well. This is a piece that they did for Shell, and it was for health and safety training. So what they were trying to do was to create some training that was going to cover different programs and modules. So thinking about working in hazardous atmospheres and lifting, and so they created this experience. And what's interesting about this experience is when you go into this experience, it's very intense. I mean, you can hear the fire. You can it's almost I don't know. I almost feel the fire. I mean, it's just so intense. But it's a multi-user experience. So you can see here, we've got somebody who's actually performing the task of putting out the fire. And then we have somebody else who is looking at some in a different area, some caution and some information, as well as some tips and stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and just load this up just for a second here and walk through it. Turn off the sound. So this is this scenario, and if you tried to do this in real life, it could be pretty dangerous, of course, trying to create something like this. So having a virtual scenario, this is a storage tanker that's overspilled, and so the idea is to locate the spill and to perform the correct steps to put it out. So you can see here, there's the flames, and then you have to go in and know what things that you need to do. There's the sounds, the information. I'll turn the sound back on here so you can hear it. And then you can see here, here's two people trying to decide what they're wanting to do. So you can have multiple people in VR. You could have the multiple trainees. You could have also the person who's working with them, or you can look at this via the web browser as well. So there is that experience as well. And then, so here is the instructions to tell them, okay, here's what you need to do. You can talk to them, you can trigger the actions of things that they need to accomplish as well. And this is the example I'm talking about with a proof of concept. If you're just trying to demonstrate and to show somebody in your organization an example of a VR simulation or training, there are agencies that have these things already done that are willing to take you into that experience and for you to have that experience. So you don't have to create it from scratch. We'll continue on here. And so, so here they are putting out the fire. All right, go back into my presentation. So that's one example. Now here's another example. So this is a example where the company DHL was trying to improve the way that they put packages in cargo storage. And in thinking about going into a warehouse and practicing that may not always be advantageous. So how can you do that in VR and allow people to try and experiment with different things and to get the idea of what they need to do? And so they wanted to make this experience really interesting and engaging. So what they did is they decided to gamify it. They wanted to have people pitted against each other. So thinking in terms of, you've got these two cargo areas set up side by side and two participants, and they are being scored for how much they get into the cargo hold, and then also how fast they do it. And so this was a really effective way for them to do it. And now that they have launched this, and it's been rolled out across 40 countries. So let's look at that and see. I'm going to turn the sound on because there's some interesting things in this one as well. I've had people make comments that looking at this, it looks like they're playing Tetris. But when you think about, you've got this odd-shaped cargo hold, and you're having to put in all these different boxes and packages to do something that's most efficient, it can be really challenging. So thinking about doing something like this in VR, where you could do it over and over again, and come up with the most efficient way to do it would be very advantageous.
We knew that VR was going to be the future of where we wanted to go from a learning perspective. And our big responsibility was around how do we, from a learning point of view, use it to increase the skills and knowledge of people in our industry.
So you'll notice that they, depending on which package they put in, they got a certain number of points. And so here's that competition. There's a player that's doing this in Los Angeles and somebody that's doing it in London, and they are competing against each other. And it looks like the London player has really got a huge points compared to the trainee in Los Angeles.
The anecdotal story so far from trialing this around the world has been second to none. We're giving people this experience that they would never really have had before, a fully immersive experience. But the only usage of that is if we know what they're doing in that immersive world. The data behind what they're experiencing, that is more crucial and more important because that leads to the real skill development.
Okay, so let's go back. So that's another example, another use case. And again, these are out there on the internet if you want to share as well. And then here's the third example. This is a healthcare example. And in this example, thinking about being able to go in and work with a CT scanner in a hospital, and then taking that scanner out of service in order to practice could be a real costly process. So being able to use VR to replicate this and then having someone work with that in the experience virtually. Here are actually two people, and you have your trainer here who's in the outer area, in the control area, looking at it. It's a great way to simulate that and then to have that experience, and then they can go out into to the real world to do that final test. Working with a real CT scanner. And again, there's a link that you can go out and look at. I'm gonna skip that one, but you can go back and take a look at that later. So what are your next steps? So in thinking in terms of what you need to do if you are getting ready to go down this journey, I think that you need to either, first of all, if you're trying to do a pilot or a proof of concept, work with an outside agency like Immersive or another company that can help you demonstrate the technology to your enterprise organization, to those stakeholders. And then you need to think about, am I going to have to bring in internal workforce and recruit people for those skills? Are you going to bringing in a Unity developer, or how are you, what tasks do you want to do internally versus what tasks do you want to outsource? You need to develop a governance strategy and within the organization, so that you are that you have standardized the way that you're approaching this learning, just like you do any other learning process. And you need to work with your internal corporate marketing and whoever else to build the awareness of these programs and how they're being used. You absolutely have to find that right use case that you're going to use to promote the technology and immersive learning. And then you need to work with your IT organization, your HR technology, whoever else that you need to work with to prepare that infrastructure to integrate augmented reality, virtual reality into the learning process, making sure that you have everything in place that you need in order to make this success. So, take a look at those things. If you want to talk to me more about that and how I'm doing that with some of the folks that I'm working with now, happy to have that conversation with you as well. So this is just a little bit about Immerse. Again, this is the company that I'm currently working with on these platforms. And that's what I have. So I'll just any questions or follow up here for our topic?
All right. I think Duncan had just made a comment about when you were showing the Shell VR case study. So is that a non-normal condition, or is that something that's part of their regular training? Because these things do happen, but hopefully not often.
Yeah, it is. It's more of a it's something that does happen, and I'll tell you, a lot of training happens because something dangerous happened in the field. There was, someone who unfortunately died because of an accident, and people have to create awareness and training, or there's significant damage. And so, we've got to jump right on that and figure out what to do. So I wouldn't call it a normal condition, but it's something that is critical.
Yeah, to be prepared for. What I did really like was the fact that you had brought up, because typically when we think of VR in the training world, these are the situations we think of, right? Something that's dangerous, especially for those of us who are so used to the oil and gas industry or other high consequence industries. But you brought up employee onboarding and sales training, which I had not thought of for VR or immersive learning before. So that was really neat. And it makes sense though, because you need something, especially when you're onboarding, but in being a former salesperson, that's a great way to be able to sit there and role play or, practice situations, especially if you're new to sales or you need some additional training.
Yes, and you'll see more and more companies are utilizing those techniques. I've seen a lot of companies using augmented reality processes for onboarding and for some of those scenarios as well, because they can integrate that into their instructor-led training very easily, and it adds some engagement. In fact, I did a escape room simulation at the ATD Technology Conference earlier this year that I think it just sparked a lot of ideas with participants. They came away and said, that's something that we could integrate within what we're doing, and it would add value. But again, it's got to be, it's hard because you get caught up in the technology, and I do too. I mean, I love my tech toys and everything, but you really have to make sure that whatever you're using, that it makes the right sense and that you find a good business case, because if you don't, you're doomed from the beginning.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. It does have to make sense. Technology is cool. It's a cool toy, but I mean, just because it's available should not be used. It has to make sense, as you had mentioned. And then I am just going to bring up one last thing mentioned. Duncan had mentioned when you were talking about data, and how many good data is king, obviously, but all the data points that you can capture, and it's similar to what Duncan and Art from RISC talk about with when they're talking about an XAPI data strategy. Just because you can capture it doesn't mean you should. So that is also a very good point to bring up. Thank you so much, Debbie. This was really wonderful, and I love seeing all the use cases, and I think that helps to spark folks' ideas and thinking about what to do for an immersive learning program.
Yeah, and like I said, there's a number of them out there on the web. So if anybody has some questions, or they want me to give them some examples of some good use cases, I'm happy to do that and to share that information. My contact information is tied to this video, so they can reach out to me, and I'm happy to share whatever I have. And I used Immerse as a good example because they're a company that's doing things, I think, the right way, but there are a number of other players in the industry that are working on these projects as well. It just makes sense to make sure you find the right partner for what you're doing.
And that's one of the things I appreciate so much about you is that you are so familiar with different players in the industry. You're not, just one. It has to make sense. It has to be a good fit. And one last thing that Duncan mentions, governance is very critical in a program like this as well. So again, thank you for being on and sharing this with us. And thank you to everyone tuning in. And if you're catching the replay, please feel free to drop in your comments or questions. We will ensure that Debbie gets any questions, and then her contact information will also be available on this video post as well. So thank you again, Debbie. And we will see you here in half an hour for Danielle Wallace talking about how to develop learner personas, which is near and dear to my heart from coming from a marketing background.
Thank you, everybody.